Welcome back to another episode of Table Setters covering all things Major League Baseball. As always, I'm Steve, joined my tag team partner, Devin. What's up, man?
What's going on, dude? Good to be back on here. Watching that Super Bowl last night, I had this thought of the Chiefs seem to be pulling a Game 5 Yankees, but pretty much for the whole game instead of just one bad inning. And honestly, I think we can all say now the Yankees, as far as the sports world is concerned, I think they're off the hook. I think they're finally off the hook right now.
And there was a lot of conversation post Super Bowl, of course, about the GOAT conversation. It's ironic that you have Tom Brady on the call while it's happening. Are you of the belief that maybe the GOAT conversation is completely null and void now, that Tom Brady can sit upon that throne and look down at everybody, or does Mahomes still have a chance to kind of right this wrong of this Super Bowl?
Listen, he still has a chance because he's below 30. If he can stay healthy, who knows? But I think this is a turning point for the Chiefs. Listen, one thing Tom Brady never did was get blown out of a Super Bowl. All three that he lost were insanely close, and he had the ball in his hand at the end, just basically not with enough time to go take the lead back. But yeah, man, I think there were some people that were hoping maybe this is Mahomes' 28-3 moment, like Brady had against the Falcons, but not even close, man. The Chiefs didn't look like they belonged in the same field.
Yeah, and the best thing about this, especially in the scope of what we're covering over here, is that the Super Bowl, or at least the end of the Super Bowl, when the champion is crowned, whether it's our team or not, we get to celebrate the start of baseball. We're one step closer to
Oh,
spring
yeah.
training. We actually have teams reporting this week, and the sun is shining down in Florida, also in Arizona, and we're getting ready for a full long season of baseball. And the other thing is, baseball takes the spotlight, with football taking a backseat. Of course, at the 12-month calendar, football fans are a fanatic in that way. Well, they'll continue to consume media, but for the most part, baseball goes into the crosshairs of all of the sports world, and we get to look forward to really them being in the center stage.
No doubt about it, man. At this point, I mean, this is where it actually gets hard, though. Like, it's exciting that baseball has the spotlight and people are reporting, but you very quickly kind of start being like, okay, like, let's get to real games. So it'll be exciting for the first week or so, seeing guys show up to camp. And then all of a sudden, a few weeks later, you start getting the bad news of like, oh, someone's arm is acting up and all that stuff. So we can't forget about that part. There's going to be some news that's, not as hopeful as we want, but for now, I'm very happy that baseball is around the corner.
So this is episode 6060. We made it across the finish line over here as we get closer and closer to episode 100. And we're almost approaching 1 year here, about a month away from when we first dropped the first ever episode of Table Setters. And what a time it's been, Devin. I mean, we've developed some friends here in the baseball market from all different walks of life, obviously covering different teams, all of our guests. Just very grateful to have that. And honestly, so much has been accomplished in such a short period of time. So I'm stoked to see where it goes for this season as it approaches.
Yeah, I feel like we have been doing what we set out to do, which was talk about all baseball all the time, like a little bit of everything, whether it be fantasy. We finally got some college talk, and I think now we'll try to make an effort to keep that in the mix a little more going forward. Obviously, MLB, free agency, trades, and once the end of March hits, we can actually talk about the games on the field. So we're going to keep it going, keep the momentum going. For anyone who's joined us here, whether it be a listener or anything else recently, or you've been with us for months and months, as we always say, we really, really appreciate it, and we hope it just continues to grow.
So if you'd like to support the show, and please do, please follow us on X or on Instagram at Table Setters Pod. Leave a 5-star review. I saw a couple more come in, new one on Spotify as well. So every little bit helps. It helps us in the algorithm, helps us to rank or whatever it is. We'll trend. I know that the episode with Ben Upton was a huge success. And, obviously to put us into center stage of the conversation, a lot of good conversation about college baseball has been started. Of course, that's starting this week, and we'll continue to look at college baseball through a different scope because you and I, as we said before, are a little bit novice in that fandom, but looking forward to it. And in this episode, as you guys can see in the title, we'll be pledging our allegiance to a team of some point. Devin and I did our research about what team we'll be following in full as the baseball season for the collegiate level continues to kick off. And looking forward to sharing that with you guys because it wasn't just on a whim. All things considered, uniforms, where they're at as far as following the teams, their schedules, all those things considered. And I'm pretty stoked about to share who my team that I'm going to be following in the 2025 season.
Yeah, I'm excited to do that as well. I'm interested in who you're going to pick because I have no idea which direction you'll go in. For me, in the midweek, this light bulb went off in my head when I was thinking about this, and I was just like, I will get into it, but I'm like, wow, Devin, like you're kind of a dumbass. There's an obvious choice. So I'll explain that when we get to that segment.
So we're going to lead that in, of course. And we also have an exclusive Q&A from Dave Sims, the new radio broadcaster of the New York Yankees. We've been trying to get him here on the show, and usually we try to have our guests on here, have a conversation, but the guy was hard to get a hold of course, as he's getting ready to pack up his bags and head over to Florida or Tampa Bay for the Yankee spring training. And of course, as the season gets forward, it's going to be hard to lock him down for an hour at a time to have a conversation. But he was nice enough to answer some questions via email. So we'll share that with you guys. We had to ask him some questions, not only about his career broadcasting wise, but the current product on the field with the Yankees. So I'm excited for you guys to hear what he had to say.
Yeah, and like I said, like you said, hopefully we one of these days do get him actually on the podcast. I mean, he's a busy dude, obviously with the Yankee stuff coming up, but he keeps himself busy during the baseball offseason with other sports as well. I think I heard that kick of destiny with Peyton Manning and Eli was Dave Sims' voice in the background, like announcing it. So like he's always got something. He does basketball games as well. So we've gone back and forth. We're hoping to get him on, but as spring training approaches and we couldn't get a date going, we're like, you know what? If you'd be willing to answer some questions just written, that's better than nothing. So we'll share that with you for sure.
And we'll continue to have guests lined up. We will do eventually have repeat guests because we have a lot of guys that we built a nice little Rolodex of contacts of different aspects of the game, of course, with fantasy in mind and specific teams. So we'll be rolling through them and tagging some new guys in. But of course, repeat guys as well. We want to have, and I know we just to kind of bury the lead here. Devin and I were talking about future episodes and potentially doing a roundtable style episode. And let us know if you guys would be interested in that, of having different faces that have been here on Table Setters to provide context and maybe have one general topic to discuss and let everyone get their 2 cents in.
Yeah, it's just kind of something we're tossing back and forth here, and I'm not sure when it would happen. I mean, like very close to the season would be kind of cool if we could organize it. Obviously, getting one guest and working with their schedule and ours can be difficult enough. If we want, say, 3 or 4 guys on here with us that have been on here before to come back and do a roundtable season preview or something like that, it's going to be tricky with schedules, but you never know. We do have a good amount of people to choose from all different walks. So that could be something we do. Another thing I noticed, I went back. So episode 60 tonight, 16, or was it 16 or 14? I might get these number backwards. So I think we've had 16 team centric guests so far, where we do an episode specifically on one team. And so we have 14 remaining that we haven't. It's either that or vice versa, but I think I have it right. So I put a little poll out and put 4 teams of like, all right, who would you guys want us to choose next? And to be honest, I mean, I wish I could just put all 14 teams we didn't cover yet and see what comes up. But the Rangers won the poll. So Rangers are a possibility. I know Steve and I were mentioning, talking about the Cubs because they seem to be in everything right now. They'd be a cool team to cover. It might just come down to, which one of those teams we can get a good guest from to come on here first.
Yeah, of course, we'll continue to make our connections and try to get some on here. I would love to talk Texas Rangers because they are an exciting team. I wouldn't say they're so much a dark horse this year because they are a year from winning the World Series. They had a down year last year, but if healthy, that team firing on all cylinders. And I said it last year, we were waiting for that offense to kick off and become explosive. And I fully believe that they're going to be firing on all cylinders again this year. They're a team to be reckoned with. And honestly, I feel like they're a favorite in that West over there.
Yeah, man. Everyone's talking about Jacob deGrom and what they're going to get from him. I think the biggest X factor, one of the biggest X factors in the entire league this year, another guy coming back from injury but much younger, is Evan Carter. Like how quickly you can forget what a stud this guy was at the end of not last season, but the season before that, and then in the run of the World Series. This guy was put in like the cleanup hole at some point. So he's a guy I am hopefully looking forward to seeing on the field this year a lot because what an exciting young player.
All right, well, let's hop into the meat of the order and talk about the news that broke while we were sleeping. A lot of good news to break down here, but let's break it down for you right here. All right, Devin. Well, the final words I said as we exited episode 59 was maybe Pete Alonso will sign. And well, we got that news just shortly after it. Pete Alonso and the Mets agreed to a 2-year, $54 million deal with, of course, the opt-out everyone is discussing. Alonso, as we remember, reportedly turned down that 7-year, $158 million extension and a 3-year, $71 million deal, and eventually settled on this short-term deal after kind of letting his cards and playing his hand too long. Uh, Obviously, we'll talk about the Mets offseason. This is probably it for what they're doing here as we get ready for them to show up in Port St. Lucie. But your thoughts on this? We got the reunion you probably wanted. You fill up the lineup. You got the bat back in there. Obviously, combine that with Juan Soto. It's a prolific offense. It's definitely going to be firing and be dangerous for the pitching staffs opposing them.
Yeah, no doubt about it. A lot of different ways to go with this conversation. I'll start with the lineup since that's what you just finished with there. I mean, maybe the most pop I've seen in my lifetime in a Mets lineup. Obviously, the 2016 with Reyes and David Wright and Carlos Delgado and Beltran. That's up there for sure, and that's tough to beat. But man, like up and down this lineup, you have Lindor in the one hole most likely. That's another conversation. Like, there's a lot of different ways you could go with this lineup. Soto can hit 40, Lindor can hit 30, 25, something like that. We know Pete, he had a down year last year and it was 34 home runs. So he's usually good for between 30 and 50. Vientos showed all the pop he got. We'll see what he can do in a sophomore year. And even guys like Nimmo can add 20 on top. And some of the guys at the bottom, I mean, Francisco Alvarez, if you look at his rookie year, he wasn't able to do it again in his second year, but that guy has light tower power. So, like, you're looking at the bottom lineup, Jose Siri, who, he's going to strike out a ton, but he can pop some out of the ballpark as well. So, up and down that lineup, there is pop. It's not the most athletic lineup at the top. That'll be something we'll see, if that comes into the bottom half a little more. I think it will. But exciting. I mean, the offense is exciting. At this point, the only hole you can really put into the Mets is the pitching staff good enough? I don't think anyone thinks it's bad, but how good it actually is going to be is a question. Like, certainly on paper, it does not look nearly as good as the Phillies or the Braves. It might look a little deeper than, say, the Braves, but maybe not as dangerous at the top. So we'll see. But another part of this story for me is Steve Cohen and David Stearns coming out on top because, Michael Kay comes out and says the Mets paid a Maserati price for a Nissan. Like, okay, buddy, you did what you had to do to get the guy. You got him for a year or two. This guy originally wanted a 7, 8, 9 year deal. He wanted to be the highest paid first baseman. Like, you have to give a little bit in these discussions and these negotiations. So to me, it makes so much sense for both sides. For Pete, like, he was not getting the offers he wanted, right? And he clearly wanted to be a Met if he wasn't getting any other, obvious offers to take. And what better situation for him to maybe have another walk year, possibly batting behind Juan Soto? Like, if you're not happy with the offers you're getting, okay, let's have an insane year batting behind Francisco Lindor and Juan Soto. And then I can ask the Mets to pay me more if I was great for them. Or there's other teams that are going to want me a lot more than, say, they wanted me this past year. The unfortunate part for him was he had 2 off seasons in a row, 2 not so good seasons in a row for him on his standards. And this is the prove it year. And obviously, if he has another year that he is not super proud of again, well, he'll opt into that second year. Like, that's obvious, and he'll take that money. But $30 million this year, so the AAV is good for him. The length isn't there, but I mean, David Stearns and Cohen look smart. I'm happy to have Pete back. I wonder if he moves forward with Boris, but I think most Met fans are ecstatic with the situation we find ourselves in. Because, again, if he opts out next year and Vladdy's not wrapped up, like, we can think about what we want to do there. And maybe we do try to get in the Vladdy sweepstakes. But in the present, I'm very, very excited.
Yeah, and the best thing about Alonso, too, you mentioned just the prove-it nature of this deal. I mean, the fact that you're batting near Juan Soto is just every bit of every opportunity to be in the best spot to be successful. And I was reading a lot of projections and listening to people talk about this Alonso deal. And part of it was, I think if he doesn't have 110 RBIs, that feels like a down year based on the opportunities he'll have to drive in some runs. So it's the best opportunity for him. I understand it was a tough, probably pill to swallow for his ego, especially after turning down that 7-year deal that was originally offered to him. But again, has the opportunity to prove it, put up huge numbers, and then maybe if he wants to stay with the Mets, it's one thing, but have the opportunity to redo this free agency that feels like it was bungled by not only Scott Boras, but himself, if we're being honest. He kind of let the cards play a little bit, and that $158 million extension was obviously revoked, and he's going to have to prove it again. So for Pete Alonso, And this is another thing too. Obviously, we talk about the production and what's going to look like on the field. There's also the off the field nature of this. This is a guy who's a fan favorite, sells a lot of jerseys. People come to the ballpark to see him. So that's something to be considered. And you and I were talking about that all throughout this drama that has been unfolding, is that at the end of the day, this is a guy who's been a cornerstone for the Mets since his 2016 draft selection. This is a guy that we look at as maybe an all-time Met. You know what I mean? Like, that's the type of numbers he's been putting up. A lot of great moments. I mean, remarkable the last year, that moment he had. But there's many other moments. You can talk about the home run derby stuff. This guy is electric. And whether you like him or not, this is a dude that makes fans come to the ballpark. And sometimes that's what it's all about.
Yeah, and he'll continue to be as motivated as you possibly can be. It's a team that wants to win now. You know, the contract situation, he's got a little chip on his shoulder with not getting what he wanted, or, you know, thought he'd be offered. So, I mean, all good things. And Steve Cohen apparently met with him before the signing went down and was just super honest with him face to face. You got to love what Cohen's becoming here. Like, almost a mediator. Like, I don't think he's stepping on David Stern's toes at all. If he was, he might have gone way over this 2 years asking price like weeks ago to just get this done. So I don't know. I've heard so much criticism in the world of X of David Stearns and a little bit of Cohen as well. And it's just like, man, like, how many wins do you need to get in the offseason to get all these fans respect? Like, you signed Juan Soto. Now you get Pete back. Like, give these guys their flowers, because they've done pretty much exactly what Met fans wanted them to do going into this, short of getting Roki Sasaki, which, I mean, wasn't necessarily their choice. And again, I'll mention it, like the pitching staff. I think they're banking on, they believe Kodai Senga can be 2023 Senga, and I think he can be. I mean, that ghost fork is as good as any pitch as far as an out pitch goes when it's working. And then Sean Manaea, if they truly believe in his changes and think he can be both of those guys, kind of like a 1-2, like maybe not true aces, but guys that can be aces some nights and maybe at their worst twos. Like, I don't think that's the worst case scenario. And a lot of Met fans are talking about, I wonder if they see Brandon Sproat figuring into this rotation somehow at some point, say midseason. I know Stern said he's definitely starting in AAA, but the fact that they haven't gone a little more above and beyond for the pitching staff, I wonder if they really believe in Sproat as an option for 2025. Obviously, you know, there's still time. A guy like Dylan Cease, a guy like Michael King, I don't see it happening. I think if it was going to happen, it would have happened already. The asking price is high, as it probably should be. Like, I don't see AJ Preller as a guy who's going to get the short end of the stick in that kind of trade. So I think we can probably move on from those talks and go into the season with what we have.
And understand, on social media, specifically X, the sky will always be falling and people will find the negative side of things. But if you look at the silver lining of this, and Devin, I am a positive guy, you know, I like to think positive. There might be a confidence in this Mets front office and just scouting system that they believe that they have made a significant difference in not just Sean Manaea, but other pitchers, that they feel like they can get the best out of them and be able to have this pitching staff and say, let's have Clay Holmes stretched out and become a starter. Maybe he can become the guy that everyone thought he could be when he was first emerging into the major leagues. So they might have something clicked here, and all of a sudden and again, we don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but what we saw at Manaea last year, if they can replicate that across the board by just figuring out arm slot or just grips or whatever with these pitching labs, there's something to be said about being kind of frugal and being able to establish pitchers and being cost effective, because we know spending a lot of money on pitching, as the Mets saw in the past, can really burn them. I mean, you spend money on a Max Scherzer and Justin Verlander, we saw how quickly that can flame out. You got to get these pitchers while they're cost effective. And then that's how you start to win a World Series, because you can't just invest in pitching post of what they've already done. You have to kind of invest in what they will do. And I think the Mets are doing that.
Yeah, they could become a destination if they can continue to help these guys. They'll become a destination. I let you mention Clay Holmes. Can he be a starter? And he's got great stuff, but can he be a starter? That's a big X factor. And the other thing, Frankie Montas, I mean, they signed him early in the offseason for $17 million a year, and that raised a lot of eyebrows and is still raising some eyebrows. So clearly they've seen something. You don't give that guy that money based on what he did 4 years ago with Oakland. So yeah, there's a lot of things to watch. There's no shortage of things to watch for as the Mets open camp and see what happens as the season gets closer.
And the one barometer and the ability to separate yourself as a successful franchise is to be smarter than everybody else and be confident in signing the Frankie Montas. And they could look like they are the smartest team in the room if this goes right. You know what I mean? Like the Sean Manaea thing, everybody looks at Sean Manaea now, and it's easy to say, yeah, we want him on a rotation. But before he was fixed, he looked like damaged goods. And I think there's a lot of things to be said about all these players. It's easy now to say, let's get Jack Flaherty and sign him to a deal like the Tigers did this year. But what about signing Jack Flaherty before he was fixed? What about signing Sean Manaea before he's fixed? There's something about these teams that can establish it and be a factory for this. And I hope for your sake and for Mets fans' sakes that they are doing that. And what they did with Sean Manaea, if they can replicate it again and find things and that clicks and all these players, it's a little bit different for everybody. That could be something that's exciting for Mets fans to watch.
Yeah, I sure as hell hope so, man. Like, things are trending in the right direction, but the National League is just such a beast, and obviously the Dodgers are the Dodgers, and the Braves and Phillies aren't going anywhere. So, and the Nationals are up and coming still. So, that's what the Mets are going to need. They can't just expect to be able to throw money. Obviously, they have a lot. Throwing money is not necessarily going to beat these other teams. They can do that. Be smart about where they use the money and where they use other things. And I think that's the point we're getting to. And it's exciting to see it kind of come to fruition here.
Well, I mentioned Jack Flaherty, and the Tigers wind up re-signing Jack Flaherty to a 2-year, $35 million deal with an opt-out in mind. Of course, you look at the deal guarantees Flaherty $25 million in this upcoming season with a potential $10 million escalator in 2026 if he makes at least 15 starts. You go through his numbers with the Tigers and the Dodgers in 2024. Originally, he wanted a long-term deal, but like a lot of these players sitting on the market late, wasn't there for them. He did wind up returning to Detroit on a short-term deal here. And now we look at Detroit's rotation here, of course, led by Tarek Skubal. You look at Reese Olson, Alex Cobb, and potentially Jackson Jobe here. I mean, competing for that fifth spot would be really exciting to see if he can kind of emerge from spring as that guy on that roster. With this, the Tigers team, of course, turning a lot of heads, exciting a lot of people with what they did last year, making that surprise run into the postseason. Getting Jack Flaherty back, and I understand, this was one of those deals that they kind of were the last guy there, last guy at the dance, kind of why not? We're familiar with each other. Cool to see this go down here and the Tigers being competitive, especially after what they did last year.
I love it, man. Like I did a thread on Flaherty probably a month or so ago and was saying like I expect him to be signed shortly after Sasaki signed, and it wasn't as quick as I thought that would be. It didn't materialize. It was a couple weeks after that. But in my write-up, I kind of put a few different teams, or like maybe 8 teams that I thought were legitimate fits for him, and would try to poke holes in certain ones. And the Tigers one, I just didn't see them going back down that road. But I also thought it would be one of the best fits, like top 3 fit for Jack Flaherty there, because he's proved he can pitch there. It's an up and coming team, and we can officially say the Tigers won that trade, because even though the Dodgers, he helps them win a World Series, I guess that's bigger. But going forward, I think because they get those prospects from the Dodgers that are pretty legit, and now Flaherty's back there, and he and Skubal seem to have this little bromance, and they're very excited to be back together. So I love the signing. The AL Central, man, I continue to go back and forth and flip-flop. I've been trying to stand strong with my Royals, man. I've been trying to go – I praise the Royals a lot for a while now. I've loved what they do, and it's Bobby Witt Jr., JJ Piccolo's done a good job in management kind of building around him. And but I don't know, man. The Tigers are starting to come up a little bit, and they've made moves, and there's still Bregman rumors. So I'm still going to stick with my Royals as the AL Central champs. Funny enough, we've seen some projections with the one team that nobody talks about in that division, the Twins, as the winners, which is very interesting. I just don't have any faith in the Twins staying healthy where they need to stay healthy. So for me, that's a no. But yeah, Tigers, Royals, obviously Guardians, we can say we didn't love their offseason, but they still do what they do. It's an exciting and fun division to watch, I think, going forward.
Well, the wild thing about the Twins even being on anyone's radar is that they've made one move, and that's right, one. O-N-E, Devin. One move. Harrison Bader was the only move, and they just made it this week. So it's not even worth discussing. So feels like they are a little bit gun shy since the Carlos Correa deal. It feels like they probably tightened the wallet, and we know that there's drama with the TV land over there, and that they know that there's no guaranteed money in there, and like they are being very conservative, and that's being very I would say that's being fair. at this point. So with the Twins, for them to be even favored, I know that they do a good job of scouting and getting the most out of their players. And you can look at their roster. There is a lot of talent there. But the fact that they didn't invest, especially with the AL Central being so open for anyone to grab here, it's sad to watch because those Minnesota fans deserve better than that.
For sure. I don't really know where they're going, to be honest. I mean, you still have big time players there in Byron Buxton and Carlos Correa. I know there was Correa trade rumors early in the offseason. Those kind of fizzled out, but clearly some projections still believe in the roster that they have there. So we'll see. To me, I just think the momentum, and I do believe in momentum, even after a whole offseason. I just like the momentum that the Royals and the Tigers have. And I like some of the leadership in both of those places as well, better than I do in Minnesota right now.
Yeah, the thing is too, if Minnesota winds up winning this division, it just is a bad sign for the rest of baseball because I think it sends the wrong message. They did nothing this offseason, and you watch teams like the Tigers and the Royals, and they get progressively a little bit better. I think it would be a bad thing for baseball if the Twins, they need to be kind of taught a little bit of a lesson here. You got to go out and invest in your team, and you can't sit there and stand pat and hope that it just works out magically. We watch teams go out there and spend some money. Like, we want to encourage those things. And I think it will show on the field. I think the Royals are exponentially better than the Twins, and I really believe that the development of all those players, again, anchored by Bobby Witt Jr., that's huge. I don't see Bobby Witt Jr. on any other of those teams, and I think that's going to be the difference maker for them. I mean, the same thing with the Guardians as well. They have their franchise player as well, and I think that is a huge difference that sets them apart, those two teams from the rest of the division.
Yeah, and a division like that where it's as close as it seems, like it kind of comes down to the team whose stars stay healthier. And the Twins, Carlos Correa, Byron Buxton, Royce Lewis, like, what do those guys have in common? They can't stay in the lineup. So, like, they're great players when they're on the field. And, man, if you could get a full season of all three of those dudes, yeah, if that's what the projection's based on, I get it. Like, yeah, I would go with the Twins as well. But there's 0% of me, and I think any other baseball fan that's been tuned in for the last 10 years, that thinks that's happening. Hell, if you could get 200 games combined from them, that you might sign up for that. That's sad at this point. But, like, that's kind of the way it's trended. Not to mention Royce Lewis fell off a freaking cliff the last, like, month or two of the year last year, which was bizarre because up until that point when he was in the lineup, he was hitting a home run every other day, and then he just couldn't stay in the lineup. And then suddenly the last month or two, it's like the Monstars took his powers. So, yeah, I can't buy into them until I see guys stay on the field.
Well, let's stick with the AL Central here. And Gleyber Torres is a proud member of the Tigers, but he's still kind of sewing up a lot of the stuff that's kind of not wrapped up with the Yankees. And we made some comments here earlier in the week with Brian Cashman and Gleyber Torres. And Gleyber, since we've last spoke, Devin, we had Gleyber snapping back. But to remind everybody of the Cashman quote, he was pretty candid about the situation. He said, quote, "When I acquired Jazz to be our second baseman and moved Gleyber to third for the rest of the year. Aaron Boone wanted to do it the other way. He moved Jazz to third after we got him and Gleyber to second because Gleyber didn't want to move to third. He was unwilling." So Torres responded on social media with now a deleted tweet, quote, "Still question mark, just turn." So didn't finish the thought there. So this is the first time Gleyber has fired back at Brian Cashman. And you go back to the 2020 season, Cashman did publicly criticize Gleyber's conditioning, claiming he was out of shape when the season returned after that COVID shutdown. Torres did admit that he was frustrated by the comment when he arrived for spring training, but kind of said, you know what? I'm going to let bygones be bygones. I'm here in the Bronx. But now that he's gone, I felt like he felt the need maybe late at night to send a tweet. He did wind up deleting it, probably best interest of everybody, but a lot of drama here. And the one thing I pull out of this is not the Gleyber stuff. It's more of Cashman and Boone. I think the commentary is more about what it says about the Yankees front office and the disconnect on the field. The fact that they acquired a player, a premier player at the trade deadline to make a difference, to make a World Series run. And you have a player, again, a lame duck player in Gleyber Torres, who everyone thought he wasn't coming back, especially with the defensive liability we saw all year, calling the shots and saying he doesn't want to go somewhere. To me, that's a bad omen for what this team is operating like.
Yeah, I think the tweet from Gleyber was just turn the page, like a book emoji was in there or something like that. But
okay.
But I mean, good. Honestly, I'm on Gleyber's side here, but I will go to what you're saying because I do believe you're right there. That's the bigger story. Like that part of that quote, he moved Jazz to third after we got him and Gleyber to second because Gleyber didn't want to move to third. He was unwilling. That's not the way it works. Like, I'm sorry, man. These guys are paid tons of money but they're paid tons of money to do what the organization wants them to do. You kind of threw your manager under the bus, but like, I feel like you should also have that power to be like, no, listen, Gleyber, you're under contract. If we write you in to play third base, you're playing third base. Like, what I would like to know more about that. Did they write him into the lineup and he refused to go out to the field? I kind of doubt that. I get he might have expressed himself and would say like, I really don't want to, but I would be highly surprised. I do not see Gleyber Torres as a guy that like wouldn't come out of the dugout if his name was at third base. Maybe he wouldn't be happy. And I get it. The manager's responsibility. Boone's kind of put in between a rock and a hard place there, because especially nowadays, your job as manager, maybe the most important part, uh, is keeping the clubhouse happy. So, there's already some issues with Gleyber. Maybe they didn't want to send him over the edge there, but I read this quote and I was like, first of all, why is he talking about this? Why is he being so? I know Cashman sometimes gets praised for being honest in interviews, and I get it. As people that now do interviews, sometimes it is refreshing to have people that give you real answers instead of just, the media training answers. But like, this is months and months later. Gleyber's gone. He's right. Turn the page. You just not only are talking shit about Gleyber, you're making yourself and your manager look really, really bad and kind of powerless. Well, he didn't want to play third. He was unwilling, so we kept him at second. No, like there's managers and general managers for a reason. Like you get to write the lineup card. I, I'm flabbergasted by this whole quote, why it was given, and the thought process about just letting a player walk all over you like that. If you acquired a dude, like you traded capital to get this guy to play second base, he says it right there that he acquired him to play second base, Jazz Chisholm, and then you didn't play him there. Luckily for them, Jazz played a pretty damn good third. If you look at some of the analytics, he played pretty well. He held his own, but it's a bad look, man, in my opinion.
No, I completely agree. And right, wrong, or indifferent, Gleyber represents maybe all the follies that happened in the World Series, and I believe it's unfair because Gleyber played an offensive part of what they did up into the World Series. He was a big role in that lineup, and he will be missed if we're being honest. As far as offensive goes, they do have to replace his
Yeah.
production, but his defensive liability, they needed to get rid of him. They made a scapegoat out of him, and you can just tell that there were. Going back, I read the quote from 2020. But there's always been bad feelings because it felt like Gleyber's never lived up to what the hype was. If we go back to when Gleyber was originally acquired in that Chapman deal from the Cubs, and he was supposed to be this franchise-altering player. And again, you ask yourself, was he the franchise-altering player? No, but he's a pretty damn good baseball player.
Yeah.
And for Cashman to go out there, it is definitely him dipping his toe in the water of letting us know how deep this runs as far as there might be a little bit dysfunction in the Yankees. For this to be able to go down, the fact that you have players calling the shots like this or feeling like Boone doesn't want to ruffle the feathers. We know Boone is a player's manager. We get that. He is heralded for that, and that's what makes him successful. But there is a line where you have to be able to hold these players accountable and put them where they're most successful. And we know the thing with Jazz, and we talked about it all offseason with Aaron Judge, putting Aaron Judge where he's most successful. You don't want to just put these guys like sim characters in certain spots. You want them to feel comfortable in the field, and then in turn, they'll be more successful offensively. And for Jazz, like you said, they got lucky he played and took to third base like a fish in water. He did. He definitely did his best doing it. Was he the best third baseman in baseball? Hell no, he wasn't. But the guy went out there and played third base for the first time in his life and did a pretty damn good job on one of the biggest stages in all of baseball, all of sports, goddamn. So for Jazz to go out there and do what he did, I'm happy he's at second base because, again, I want him in his best self. And if the Yankees are going to be good this year, Jazz Chisholm is going to play a huge part of that. But the conversation goes towards why was Boone allowing Gleyber to call the shots here? And again, why is Cashman talking about this after Gleyber is gone? It just makes everyone look bad. And sometimes you have to zip your lip and give those stock answers and don't be as candid. I mean, maybe he didn't think anyone would hear this. Maybe no one thought it'd be a big deal, but this is New York. It's New York media. And you're saying it on the Yes Network. Of course, headlines will be made. Radio shows will make whole segments about this. We'll talk about it for 10 minutes on a podcast. This is a little bit alarming to me, to say the least, as a Yankee fan.
Should be, yeah.
This goes with everything that, you have the criticism, fair or unfair, about Aaron Boone and how he managed the team or lack thereof, where you have the front office calling the shots. He's a puppet, quote unquote. And this alludes to maybe he has a little bit of a lack of control in the dugout, and you want to make sure that he's telling these players that they're doing what he wants them to do. And again, if you say, I acquired Jazz to do something and he wasn't doing it, where's Cashman's authority of stepping in and saying, I'm going to pick up the phone and call Aaron Boone and say, all right, a weekend, I get it. It's not working out, but can we put Jazz where I decided that we acquired him for? Can we put him at second base, please? Like, what is going on?
Yeah, man, I don't get it. That's all. I'll finish with that. I don't see the benefit of Cashman giving that much honesty at this point, like going into spring training. It made no sense.
And also, I don't want to read too much into the quote. It is weird that he said, I acquired Jazz, not we acquired Jazz. Like the Yankees front office, the Yankees, the team acquired Jazz. Cashman didn't. You know what I mean? It's weird that he said, when I acquired Jazz. Does that rub you the wrong way like it did me?
It didn't stand out to me the first time, but when you pointed out, yeah, a little bit, definitely.
It's very weird because this is a collaborative effort. It's not just Cashman
Right.
acquiring players, and it just feels very bizarre. But we have other just small minor moves here. The Cubs acquired Ryan Brazier from the Dodgers to bolster their bullpen. We also have the Pirates signing Tommy Pham to a 1-year deal. Anything stick out for both of these deals that went down?
So Brazier, I mean, he's a useful player. He's obviously been around for a long time, older player, but was pretty good. 3.54 ERA last year. Was used kind of as like the opener part in some bullpen games, especially in the playoffs. The Mets actually beat him up one day. I do that stands out. One of those playoff games, but he's a useful tool. What stands out to me there is the fact that the Dodgers roster is so loaded that they have to just get rid of these like certain dudes like this. Like they have no room for a player that is very worthy of a roster spot in most places. So good for the Cubs to add to their bullpen. Good piece and not expensive. So well done there. I think a lot of teams wanted Brazier. And then as far as the Pirates and Tommy Pham, I mean, okay. Pirates fans are frustrated for good reason. This is not against Pham either. It's just that they let so many other guys go by that they could have given some money to. And there was a crazy stat. I'll try to find it so I can give you the exact one. That's been kind of making its way around the internet of how long it's been since the Pirates have given a multi-year deal to a free agent. It's actually sickening. Like it'll make you nauseous if you haven't heard it. So I'm going to find that while you give your thoughts on it. But yeah, to me, it's just like the story for Brazier is like that. I'm surprised LA hasn't done more of that, of guys that are like fringe roster spots that have to be traded away. And then as far as the Pirates, it's just, I hope Tommy Pham goes there and tears it up for them. That's the honest truth. He'll bring some attitude to the clubhouse, so that's good. But like, I hope he goes and tears it up. There have been times where he goes on runs. I mean, when he was very good as a Met 2 years ago, and then when they traded him to Arizona, he was actually a pretty important piece for the Diamondbacks World Series run. So like, there's nothing to shit on Tommy Pham about. He can be a very good, useful player and a good clubhouse dude. It's just more the story about how insanely frugal the Pirates are and continue to be.
Yeah, and he's going to turn 37 next month. And look at what he did last year, playing for the White Sox, the Cardinals, and the Royals. And he has a declining defense and all that. And Pittsburgh did need a corner outfielder after they did wind up non-tendering Brian De La Cruz and Connor Joe and replacing him with the algorithm of what's here. It's interesting. And we mentioned the Twins not making any moves. And this is the Pirates' fifth MLB signing this year. Andrew McCutchen, of course, as we mentioned, famously had or infamously had his name spelled wrong at Pirates Fest.
Oh my God.
Caleb Ferguson, Adam Frazier, and Tim Meza. So Tommy Pham joins this list here. And at the very least, I know that they're small little incremental moves, but at least they're making moves. Little moves like this kind of shift
I
the
guess.
roster and figure it out. But I'm comparing it to the Twins here. Like they're
I got it.
shifting
I
things a
got
little
you.
bit. And Pham is likely going to be starting here. And I guess he could shift into a platoon or bench role if this winds up working out. You got to consider Jack Sawinski and everything going on, Nick York and Billy Cook and all the stuff that's happening there. Are they going to win the NL Central? I mean, unless something crazy happens, maybe. But this is just an example. Maybe a Tommy Pham could be acquired at the trade deadline for another team if he kind of gets hot and figures it out. And he's 37 years old, but like you said, he brings fire. He punches people. He's a fighter. Don't play fantasy football against him. That kind of thing.
Yeah. So here's what I was referring to. Every team except the Pirates has signed at least one free agent to a multi-year contract since the year 2022. While Pittsburgh has not done so since December of 2016. They have not signed a free agent to a multi-year contract since 2016. Like, just let that breathe for a minute.
Wow.
2016. disgusting.
It's wild, man. But uh, I think the thing is, we need to start holding these teams accountable and find a way to do this. And for everyone that wants to bitch and complain about the Dodgers, and it's apples and oranges, like we discussed, because it's two different scenarios. There's different amount of money coming in, but there is money coming into Pittsburgh. Let's not fool ourselves. There's money that could be spent. Same thing with Minnesota. There's money that could be spent for these teams to get better and justify filling that beautiful goddamn ballpark. I mean, both the teams have it in common. Minnesota and Pittsburgh have two of the most beautiful ballparks in all of baseball. Give a reason for fans to show up outside of just the excitement of opening day and figure out a way to get people in there for May and June and July and have an exciting with this extra playoffs position out there. Every team should be in the race.
Do you think Minnesota still has the pork chop on a stick, or do you think they got rid of that after the Kim Jones incident?
Nah, they definitely have it. There's no way you don't get rid of pork chop on a stick.
Well, if any Minnesota fans are listening, we want to know if pork chop on a stick is still a thing.
Dude, I'm gonna find it because it was the reason why it was popular there is because it was like the Minnesota State Fair. That's the reason why they have them there. So, because it's a big thing in the Minnesota area that they put pork chops on a stick, and I think, yeah, I'm looking up right now. Peterson's pork chops. That's what they have in the stadium, and it's pork chop on the stick. That dude took a huge bite out of Kim Jones' shoulder. Like, what a ballsy move. What do you think that guy is right now?
I don't think he should be banned with the other Yankee fans that were banned for the Mookie Betts stuff. That guy.
Well, dude, speaking of that, not to go on a weird tangent around that, but did you see that there was an article that came out from the fan? I forget his name. Obviously, I don't want to even give him any press, that he wants anonymity because he feels like people are sending stuff to his house, sending stuff to his job.
Cry me a river. Cry me a river. They tried to make this dude a hero that night. Do you remember?
I do. He was on Barstool the next day, the whole thing.
Was it Jesse Rogers or something? Like an ESPN reporter, like met up with these guys and interviewed them. And they're all smiling in pictures and stuff. So don't give me the anonymity crap, because for 24 hours, for some reason, you were becoming a cult hero. And now, you realize that most people actually think you're a piece of trash for what you did there. Could have like hurt Mookie Betts' career. Yeah, come on. Just give me a break with that. I don't want to hear him talk about needing sympathy or anything like that.
Well, the two final moves we're going to talk about here, the Angels signed Juan Moncada to a 1-year deal, and we'll talk about how that affects Anthony Rendon. And the Dodgers also re-signed Kike Hernandez on a 1-year deal. So we could break that down. Of course, we know how important the Dodgers and Kike Hernandez, their relationship is for success. But I'm curious your thoughts on Anthony Rendon, because it looks like Juan Moncada is going to be taking that starting third baseman job from Anthony Rendon, and Rendon is going to hand it over gleefully. He doesn't want to play baseball, as we all know. And looking at Moncada, like, this was a huge prospect, and like, it's hard not to talk about what he could have been, obviously involved in that Chris Sale deal all the way back in the day with the Red Sox. You wonder why Boston gave up on him. God. He's only 29 years old. Injury plagued tenure with the White Sox. You look at what
where have we heard that before?
Part of that crew. Exactly. But they're looking for some stability at third base, and Rendon is potentially going to move into a backup first base role and find a way there. I mean, the Angels have to figure out a way to do something to kind of get out of this black cloud of doom that's hanging over them, because I mean, this Rendon thing, I feel like that to me is a nice microcosm of what the Angels are. This Rendon deal that just hangs looming over them. Because we forget how good Rendon was with DC, dude. How good was he?
I don't forget, because I had to watch him destroy the Mets constantly. He had a 10 RBI game against my Mets one day. He was a stud, man. When he signed with the Angels, I thought it was an amazing deal. Like, he was so good for a while. Like, he's now kind of one of the jokes of MLB, which is crazy. But if you don't realize how good he was before the Angels, he was such a good player, like unbelievable, and a pain in the ass to pitch against. But for the Angels, I just kind of, there's no better way to fill the hole that's kind of left by an often injured player than signing another oft injured player. Like, this is an Angels move, man. Listen, Moncada, I will say this. The White Sox have obviously become synonymous with ruining young talent by them getting injured constantly, whether that's an organizational flaw or it's just bad luck and it's these guys' conditioning and it's really their fault. I don't know, but you will start to see a little bit more, because if Yoan Moncada goes to Anaheim and has a decent season and isn't out injured very many times, and Eloy Jimenez is in Tampa now and starts hitting more like Eloy Jimenez was thought that he could hit many years ago, and stays in the lineup a little more, like suddenly you're going to be like, all right, this is a White Sox problem. And I mean, Luis Robert is another test of that theory. That's my most recent thread was on him. I find him fascinating because 2 years ago the guy hits 38 home runs, is an absolute stud. You finally think you're seeing his potential. And then last year plays 100 games, which means he missed a lot again. And when he was in there was god awful. One of the craziest stats I included in there was he hit 0 against splitters. 0. He saw 70 something of them, which is not a lot, but like you hit 0 against it. And his numbers against cutters were insanely bad too. And some of the decreases, and there was some people who commented on the thread kind of saying I was looking too far into it. And maybe I could be guilty of that for sure. I try to kind of, take the stats and come up with some theories based on them. But I don't know if I'm digging too deep because I understand he was on an all-time bad team, but you want your star level players to be able to still put up some numbers even when the team's really bad. I mean, look at what A-Rod did in his Texas days. That team was always bad, and he's winning MVPs there. Like, I know the easy comeback is like, oh, he was probably on steroids. I get it. But, like, I'm not buying that. So we're going into a little tangent here, but I want to see what these former White Sox do in their new homes. And if Luis Robert can bounce back from last year. I mean, some of his projections are acting like last year didn't even happen. Like have you seen some of his projections? They're being mighty optimistic.
Yeah, feel like they're inflating it so his trade value goes back up so they can get the best case scenario with it. But the one thing I will say about this, and baseball's never short of stories, MLB insider Sam Blum did tweet this, that the Angels will open the season in Chicago now with Mancada on the roster and possibly Tim Anderson. So very interesting to
I
have
forgot
those
about
guys.
Tim.
So March 27th, they'll be in Chicago to open the season. A lot of baseball fans probably won't be watching. They'll be watching more of the high-profile games, but something to watch over there. Ken Rosenthal did have a quote in one of his stories in The Athletic, said the Angels know they can't count on Anthony Rendon to play third base to be healthy. So no one has any confidence in Anthony Rendon. And as you mentioned, what was a prolific kind of Hall of Fame trajectory career with the Nationals has tailspinned into being the butt of a lot of jokes, which is insane. I don't think anyone had that lined up for him, and especially where he was projected to go. He signed that huge deal, felt like a huge loss from the Nationals, and I don't even think the Nationals saw that going. They just couldn't afford him because I think if he would have stayed, they would have loved to have him. But maybe things would have shifted a different way if he stayed in house. Maybe it is a culture thing for the Angels, and that's more of the pull the thread, have the conversation type of moment.
Yeah, man. I mean, he's just the latest on a long list of guys that were very good before they signed with the Angels, and then kind of just I couldn't find it anymore. His was a surprise to me, man. Like I said, as a Met fan, I watched a lot of Washington National. Anthony Rendon just beat the crap out of us when the Nationals were a very good team for several years. So, yeah, a surprise to me, but yeah, kind of the butt of everybody's joke now.
Do you have any thoughts on the Kike stuff? I mean, I feel like you and I have been just throwing praise on Kike and his fit there and splitting time between everywhere he's been. I mean, he's mostly known as a Dodger, but we've seen what he's done elsewhere. His most prolific moments happen in the postseason. I think that's what the Dodgers have him for.
Yeah, I mean, just get rid of the cup hump celebration, and I'm cool with it. I don't know. Yeah, he's a Dodger, man. Like that's pretty much the only place he seems to really fit and reach his potential, and probably outkick his coverage a little bit, to be honest. Like the player he seems to become in big spots in an LA uniform, I think is better than the player he actually is.
Yeah, and he did confirm the news on social media with the caption "walking through the open door," which means it's never actually been closed. Anytime he leaves, he winds up coming back, and
Yeah.
the relationship with Kike and the Dodgers is that all-time baseball love story. He's the perfect fit for that team. It's wild. And I love, I understand that, we make Kike a little bit a joke with the stuff you just mentioned, like with the dancing and the cup stuff and all that. But he's so essential to what the Dodgers have done. I mean, the 2020 World Series specifically and the stuff he did during that playoffs, but even this one to the World Series in 2024, the ability to play multiple positions. And we're going to talk about what our table setters as being important and getting on base and scoring runs and setting the tone. Being able to play multiple positions and contribute in any way possible for your team, I think it's understated in baseball and people need to value a little bit more. And Kike Hernandez is like the exemplary of doing just that.
Yeah, and that's what the Dodgers are, and they've done such a good job at making this team superstar laden, but also they have these other little annoying players that are a pain in the ass to play against.
Yeah,
So you
that's
have all
Kike.
these, yeah, Kike, that's Tommy Edman. Like once upon a time, it was Chris Taylor. He's kind of lost his mojo over the years, but like
Yep.
once upon a time, he fulfilled that role. And they've done a great job. Like, yeah, tons of superstars, but then those other spots are taken by these guys that are just going to frustrate you and do things that you think they shouldn't be able to do at certain times. And now, you know what? It's an interesting comparison with the Mets. Now they have all these power guys. They're going to need some guys to step up and play that role and play it really well. And that's where like a Brandon Nimmo and those kind of guys are going to have to chip in a different type of way to really reach their full potential.
And I'm curious how Gavin Lux adjusts to going over to Cincinnati. Like he plays that role, of course. Like he was like the latest version of that frustrating Dodgers player that he does a lot of things well. And I'm curious what he does in crucial role. Let's be honest, for Cincinnati, they're expecting a lot from him to be a utility player, but going out there and being a key piece of that offense. So uh, I'm looking forward to Gavin Lux. And there's something more attractive as a fan watching a guy in a Reds uniform do it. And it's frustrating to watch the Dodgers do it because of the success they've had. I think this as opposing fans, we look at it, and that's why Kike kind of frustrates everyone because we've all been in the receiving end of a Kike rally that got started with one of his just hits, and whether it be the game tying home run in Game 7 in the 2020 NLCS or whatever it is, we've been burned by Kike as fans, Yankees and Met fans alike.
We have. Yep.
So we also just finishing off the news here before we get into our Dave Sims Q&A and our Mount Rushmore with you guys came for. The Cincinnati Reds will honor Pete Rose by wearing a number 14 patch on the jersey sleeves throughout the season. And also similarly, we're going to have the Milwaukee Brewers paying tribute to the late broadcaster Bob Uecker by featuring a patch with his signature over a gold and navy plaid background on their uniforms. Nice touch. You guys can follow Chris Creamer and all the UniWatch stuff. They did post the pictures of this earlier today. The right move by both franchises. All I can say here.
Yeah, not a lot to say other than well done. And I did see the euchre patch. It looks awesome. Beautiful. Well done. Just classy. So good all around.
All right, well, let's move into our Q&A here with Dave Sims and break down everything that we asked him. All right, Devin. So you've been in contact with Dave Sims throughout the last couple of weeks, trying to get him here on the show. As we mentioned, of course, Dave Sims, famously of the Seattle Mariners broadcast, is now moving over to the Yankees, filling that seat that has been filled for many years by John Sterling. Big shoes to fill. And he's going to be coming over here and calling Yankee games. So New York fans are going to get used to his very unique style of calling games.
Yeah, I mean, listen, Dave Sims is almost a legend in his own right at this point. He's done a ton of work in sports and different games. And I put in the most recent thread with the interview questions I put up on Twitter today. A fun fact: the first and only broadcaster to ever call two perfect games in the same season. He did it for Philip Humber on the road first as a White Sox, one of maybe the most random perfect game ever. And then for his own guy, Felix Hernandez, it's just crazy because I think since then there maybe has been one perfect game since those two in that season, which is pretty wild. And he got to call both of them. Pretty crazy. But yeah, so I'll be honest. We threw some questions at him, kind of split between broadcasting type of questions and mostly Yankee questions with a Mariner question in there as well. And he was very short and to the point, I guess. For me, it's interesting because he's going to be the Yankees guy. I thought the most interesting answer he gave to a question was my Mariners question. It was just a little more in depth than some of the other answers we got. I almost feel like he's taking a wait and see approach with the Yankees. Like he wants to kind of get his feet wet a little more before he puts some big time, very specific opinions out there. He was mostly positive about, or pretty much all positive about what the Yankees have done this offseason and what they're going to do going forward. But for the Mariners, I asked him, he's watched them very closely, obviously, as their guy for years now, what he thinks about Jerry DiPoto kind of saying, we've been quiet this offseason because we like our team and we don't feel like there's a lot of holes and we feel like the offense is going to be better than it was last year. And his answer was the Mariners aren't spending big dollars. There's question marks at second base and third base. The bigger issue was the offense was underwhelming last year, which wastes some of the brilliant starting pitching last season. And folks in the great Pacific Northwest are not happy. So he's honest about that. And I mean, I think he hit it on the head. What could they be happy about? Because they're going to, if the offense doesn't take a step forward, they're going to continue to waste this brilliance they have 1 through 5 in the rotation. So that answer stood out to me. But some of the other questions, very, very short and to the point.
Yeah, and the other question that like I said, Devin posted on at @TablesettersPod on Twitter, where you can see all these answers here, the specific questions. The interesting part was I had asked him the question about following in the footsteps of John Sterling, and of course, here in New York, a legend in Yankees radio history. And I asked him, how do you plan to honor his legacy while bringing your own unique style to the booth? And this was kind of piggybacking on the award that he presented to Susan Waldman and John Sterling a
Right.
couple months back. I think maybe it was at the end of January, mid-January, where he was talking glowingly about filling their shoes and being honored by it. So I wanted to give him a little bit of a chance to elaborate on that in long form and writing. And the answer he gave on, was, like you said, very brief. He said, quote, "My job is to describe the action of Yankees baseball. What's John Sterling's legacy have to do with me calling Yankee games?" And if you read that a certain way, you could read that as like maybe he was a little bit upset about the question being asked, but I meant it as nothing but respectful, like just asking him, because me as a Yankee fan for my whole life, John Sterling's been really the soundtrack of summers for me in the car. And like for me, it's like taking into account his presence. How do you not take that when you take that seat, no matter of your own legacy? Of course, we're not discrediting what Dave Sims has already done, filling the seat. Obviously, he's earned that spot. But for John Stern's legacy not to come into any sort of contribution to what you're bringing to a Yankees booth, I feel like that's, understated. A lot of Yankee fans, whether he believes it or not, take in consideration what he is taking from John Sterling and adding to his legacy. To me, that's important to Yankee fans, and I to me, I think Dave Sims should understand that from a Yankees fan perspective, because I'm speaking from the heart with that.
Yeah, I didn't love that answer either, if I'm being completely honest. Listen, we don't want to sit here and bite the hand that feeds us a little bit. So if anyone's listening here and be like, "Oh, these guys are so ungrateful," listen, we're very appreciative of Dave giving us the time of day. And to be honest, we've gone back and forth with him several times, and he always responds. But I think because he responded to us and seemed so willing, that we expected maybe a little bit more out of some of the answers. If you're going to take the time to respond, like, I think maybe put some more thought into it. And that one really, it comes off as a little dismissive, the way he wrote it here. And we listen, with every answer we put, I copy and pasted the email he gave to me. I did not change any answers or twist the word. So you can bet that. And the questions that we wrote are exactly how he sent as well. So when you see those answers, that's what he gave us. It does remind me. This is why I prefer people coming on and having face-to-face conversations, because that changes things and people can hear the tone of a question and things like that, and you can kind of expand on a question a little bit and clarify. It reminds me, I don't know if you've ever seen the Key and Peele skits, one of my favorites, where they're texting back and forth.
Oh yeah.
And they're both reading each other's texts in a way that neither one means. And it's hilarious because they both end up getting super upset thinking the other person is saying terrible things to them when they're not. That kind of, this whole back and forth reminded me of that a little bit. And I wonder if there is any of that. I think we've all probably sent or even received texts like that where you read one and it's not meant to be the way you feel like it is, but there might be a little bit of that. But yeah, I think we wanted a little bit more. But yeah, if you guys haven't seen it yet and you're listening to this on Tuesday morning, check it out. Give us your thoughts. Maybe you think we're being a little too harsh on the answers, or maybe you agree with us, or let us hear it.
So he did also address the Yankees being the favorites of the American League, and you asked the question, do you believe that's still true after the departure of Juan Soto? And his quote was, "Why wouldn't the New York Yankees be the AL faves? Acquiring Goldschmidt, Bellinger, Fried, and Williams are excellent moves added to the important incumbents. Remember, they are the defending AL champions." So he's confident this team can repeat as AL champions. And we'll do our season preview, and I do have a lot of paths I see the Yankees being able to make it back there. And it's not so much of what they did, it's maybe what the AL hasn't done. And again, we'll talk more further as the season gets closer about our previews and predictions for who will wind up in the World Series. But there is a path for me that the Yankees get back there. And that's not saying that they're a better team without Juan Soto. I think it's because the American League is wide open for a team to jump up and take it. And for Dave Sims, I do agree with what he's saying there. He was a little bit more in depth. He did actually mention the players and the excellent moves and all that stuff. So comes as a very team friendly answer, right? Like this is what you'd probably hear on the Yes Network, which I'm curious of how he approaches as well. Because John Sterling had no problem criticizing the Yankees. And if you listen to
Right.
him during the World Series, John Sterling was just as one of us. And I think that's why we appreciate John Sterling, and me as a Yankee fan did so. It was like one of us out there, especially in his formidable years where he's out there and being really the voice of our radio childhood. He was very critical of the Yankees. And then this World Series was no different. He was talking about all the defensive follies, and there was no frills around what he said. And for me, with Dave Sims here, I'm curious how he's going to hug that line, because if you compare both what John Sterling brought to the table and what Dave Sims is, I wonder if he's going to be comfortable being critical of the Yankees, and we'll see. I mean, that's the thing, because you have to kind of build that rapport with Yankee fans to earn that trust. And John Sterling, of course, had decades of that, and people just kind of accepted his opinion because he was one of us.
Yeah, and we'll see the dynamic with Dave Sims and Susan Waldman too. Will be interesting. They're apparently friendly, and Dave, I've seen interviews with them saying they kind of like to throw little barbs at each other. So it seems like they'll be comfortable together already. But yeah, his answer about the Yankees being favorites. I mean, I think you just got to remember, like, Goldschmidt, you don't know what you're going to get. Like, he's not the Paul Goldschmidt of old. Cody Bellinger, we're not sure. He should fit better in that ballpark than he did in Wrigley. But I get it. It's more a comment on the American League being kind of the weaker league, and seeing what these other teams, if they did enough to try to catch the Yankees. But yeah, like I said, go check out the interview. It's posted on Twitter, and tell us what you think.
And we also appreciate Dave Sims for taking the time to answer us. We don't take that lightly. I know he's a busy guy, and we definitely are honored that he would take the time and answer us. And we look forward to eventually having him on this show so we can hear him expand and tell us about his journey and all that if he's willing to come on. It seemed like he was, before the schedule got in the way. You guys can follow him at Dave Sims _. And again, follow us at Tablesetters Pod. Check out the answers. Devin did a good job posting the graphics with the quotes on it. Like Devin said, it's exactly as it was written. And I do enjoy a lot of the answers he gave us. It was cool to see he gave us the time of day. And it is enlightening for me as a baseball podcast to think where we are 60 episodes in, that the voice of the New York Yankees on the radio gave us the time of day. And also, let's not forget, Keith Rad was on here, the voice on the radio for the Mets, gave us the time and spoke with us as well. So we've come a long way since you and I were chopping it up, trying to figure out what this podcast would look like. So we want to take appreciation of that.
Yeah, no doubt, man. We appreciate every guest we get in whatever capacity we get it. So we definitely don't want to come off as that as if we're not appreciating it. We do, for sure.
Absolutely. So let's get into our next segment here, where we're going to make our college commitments based off everything we talked about with Ben Upton. All right, so as we're approaching this NCAA season, which of course starts this week, we're getting ready for all the games to kick off, ESPN Plus, and checking them out. Devin and I were just in discussion trying to figure out a way to be more invested in the college baseball season. And what better way than finding a team and doing our research and finding a team to back, and potentially, buying some merch and following the games and all that stuff. So I'm excited for the possibility of that. The one thing I will say about the college baseball podcast, as I mentioned at the opening of the show, it is clear to me how popular college baseball is, how much fandom of NCAA baseball has come a long way, where the conversation and the engagement with that episode we had with Ben Upton was incredible. And one of the comments on our YouTube page, you guys can check us out on YouTube. I know a lot of people consuming this show is audio, Spotify, Apple, etc., but we do have a YouTube page, and there was a comment on there that took some umbrage with us not mentioning Oregon State, and actually tried to get you to pledge your allegiance to Oregon State. And I'm wondering if you were lured a little bit by that person who just said, come join the team and be a Beaver with us.
I thought about it. I thought about it long and hard. But no, I truthfully already had my commitment before I saw that comment. So I kind of have to stick with it at this point.
So Devin, I'll let you lead the way here. Tell us who you're choosing to follow and why, and I guess how you came to that conclusion.
Okay, so I alluded to it a little earlier that I realized I'm kind of an idiot when I said last week that, like, oh, I don't want to just pick a team to pick them that I have no real connection to. It feels like something like a little kid would do. All right. So my dad went to Wake Forest the first 2 years of college. Oh, wow. And I talk to him about Wake Forest sometimes, whether it be the football team, the basketball team, sometimes even the baseball team the last couple of years. And it just completely slipped my mind. I think partly because he's never been like diehard into Wake Forest, maybe because he didn't end up graduating from there. He's only there for the first couple of years. I feel like the most passionate he's ever been for Wake Forest sports was when Tim Duncan was playing at Wake Forest for college basketball, which, I mean, hard not to. But, I mean, for me, it's obvious, and I don't want to feel like, this is an easy one to pick because they're super relevant in college baseball. But it's the only true connection I can think of. To be honest, before this popped in my head, like, oh, you're a moron. You do have a connection. Before that moment, that light bulb moment, I was considering a couple of the teams that Ben had mentioned, and maybe you'll go that way last week about some of the fun teams that are kind of mid-majors. And there's still a part of me that wants to kind of pick one of those teams too. And maybe I will. Maybe I'll have one of the big guys and then a mid-major that I also cheer for. But I have to go with the Wake Forest Demon Deacons. Like they're my connection. It's a hell of a program, obviously. Their pitching lab seems to be talked about all the time. Rhett Lauder, and then Chase Burns last year. You got a guy like Nick Kurtz and a bunch of other guys from Wake Forest that have been early draftees the last couple of years. So I think I'm going to have fun with it. But like you mentioned, I think I'm going to have to get some merch here sometime in the near future.
Or maybe they could send it our way. I mean, in these colleges, they got a
That would
lot
be
of those
nice.
shirts and, the warm-up shirts, whatever. We'll take whatever on here at Table Sitters Pod. So whatever you guys want to send our way. But for me, I did some research here, and I'm choosing to follow Campbell University's baseball team 2025.
Oh,
The Fighting Camels, love their uniforms, and they have developed a reputation as one of the most successful mid-major programs. I try to stick within what Ben Upton was talking about, and they have produced some Major League Baseball talent. You go back, Cedric Mullins is alum over there. He made his name, of course, with the Baltimore Orioles and made his name there. Zach Neto recently, he gained some attention after being drafted by the Angels and seeing what he's done, and they continue to churn out some high-quality prospects. And what I really liked about, I guess, what separated them from the pack for me, like I said, the uniforms, and they are in North Carolina. They're 2 hours away from where I visit, where my family lives. So it's possible to go check out a game this year. But they're able to compete with the top tier programs. And if you look at their upcoming schedule for this year, they're going to be facing big matchups. They're facing Duke. They're facing East Carolina. They're facing Georgia Southern. And they're also going to be taking the conference rivals, like we mentioned before on the podcast with Ben Upton, UNC Wilmington. And I looked up some of their prospects and looking at some of the players that are going to be really on the radar, potentially being in the major leagues. They got a 6'3" outfielder weighing 195 pounds in college named Joe Simpson out there. And his athleticism is something to be watching here. Dalen Thompson as well is another outfielder on this roster that I'm looking forward to watching. And I don't know, man, they play the game the right way. It seems like, by all reports, they're aggressive. They're a speed first style. And that draws me in. I like teams, and those Yankee teams from back in the day that were, that to me, they just worked hard and they kind of beat you to death in a war of attrition. And they do things with smart base running, quick thinking. And it seems like that's what Campbell's doing over there. And I'm excited to check it out. And they have an identity, and it's backed by being competitive. So I'm stoked to check this out. And I'm definitely going to pick up some merch. And again, Campbell University, send me some stuff, dude. I'm a fighting camel right now.
Well, you did your homework, man. Funny story, man. I can't believe that's the team you picked. So I just mentioned my dad being a Wake Forest guy, and that's why I'm going with them. So his middle name is Campbell, and obviously a very unique middle name. And because of that, he's actually ordered some Campbell University stuff. I feel like he's he just loves having different like college sweatshirts and things like that, like crew neck sweatshirts. And he has some Campbell stuff. So that's funny that you mention it. And he's almost like become a fan of theirs because it's the Campbell Camels, which is, hard not to root for, I guess. But and I just want to mention, I'm a Delaware Fighting Blue Hen. Like, that's my alum. So by no means am I writing them off. But the baseball program, if I will follow them as well. That's where I went to school. We'll see if they pop up. It's funny, after we did last week's episode, I mentioned how I'm Delaware alum, but haven't been much of a baseball school over the years. And then like 2 days later, 11.7 Ben Upton's podcast posted that Delaware sent him some merch.
Yeah.
Not necessarily because of that, but I thought it was a kind of a coincidence, I guess.
So my alum is St. Joseph's College and the St. Joseph's University, now that they've transitioned over in Patchogue, and they're part of the Skyline Conference. They do have a pretty damn good baseball team over there, but they're not competitive at that level.
D3, right?
Yeah,
D3?
maybe someday they'll get up there and they'll be competitive. But they are a team I do follow. When I was going to school there, I was watching the games and checking them out. And in my introduction, I potentially wanted to get into broadcasting. I did explore that route, checking out over there. But I'm just excited for this college baseball season because I really believe it's a pipeline truly for us to become more intelligent Major League Baseball fans and understanding the prospects. And that's the exciting part about this, because again, we compared it last week, maybe as novices, to football and the NCAA, and the getting excited about the prospects. But I think that expands our fandom, being able to get excited for players before they get drafted, and be able to recognize names as we approach the draft and get ready for it. That's a lot of fun, and I think that's what makes the 12-month calendar for football fandom go round and round for people. And I think if we can kind of get a hold of it and wrap our hands around it, and maybe help people listening to the show understand college baseball and what it means to eventually helping your Major League Baseball team win a World Series, I think people will get a little bit excited about it as well. There's a lot here, man. I'm excited for NCAA. Of course, we're going to balance it with the MLB coverage we bring to you guys every week here, but we'll give you guys an update. We'll let Ben Upton kind of be our usher here and guide us through this journey, but I'm stoked to check it out. Metal bats and all the clanging around and some dirty uniforms. I'm stoked.
You know what? I mean, Ben said not only does he want to come back on maybe some kind of monthly or bi-monthly spot to talk college baseball, even if it's like 10, 20-minute segments, something like that. He also told us off air that he could help us get some guests maybe from the college baseball world. Now that we've pledged our allegiance here, I think maybe we'll have to reach out and ask him if he has someone from Wake, maybe someone from Delaware, whom they might be mad at me for not just saying they're my team. And now Campbell as well. I think we have some targets.
So there's also an infielder that I'm looking at their roster, Jonah Oster. He's an infielder, 6'2", weighs 205 pounds, and he's looking to be a power bat in the middle of that lineup. So pretty stoked to check this out. So again, we'll be following. We'll give you guys updates. I'm probably going to go out and purchase some merch. But again, if you guys are out there, Campbell University, put the good word in for Table Setters. I'll rock the shirt right here on this pod here and make sure I represent out there. If you guys send me something free, I'll give you guys my address. DM us at Table Setters Pod.
Hell yeah. And I'm looking at this. Interestingly enough, so Wake Forest's first game they open with is, am I looking at this right? LIU? We're Long Island guys, so it stands out. Interesting. So that LIU
At
traveling
LIU?
down. No, traveling down to Winston-Salem to play that game.
Yeah, I mean, LIU would be the Brooklyn campus, I'm assuming.
I'm not sure.
I'm looking up LIU baseball just to check this out, because it is
St. John's travels down there as well. St. John's made some noise in the beginning of the year last year. I remember that catching my eye and kind of getting me into college a little bit. So yeah, there's several teams from the Northeast that go down to Wake Forest, Princeton as well. So I was really looking, just scrolling. Oh, Notre Dame, Wake Forest, that's a good one. I was really scrolling to see, because you mentioned Campbell's in Carolina. Obviously, Wake is there as well. I wonder if they ever play each other during a season. Coastal Carolina plays Wake, so there's some good stuff there that we're gonna keep our eye on. I'm excited. I'm in. We're bought in. This is how you get interested in something. You gotta figure a route in when you don't have an obvious one. And now we're full go.
Go Camels. All right, let's get into our next segment here. It's our Mount Rushmore of Table Setters. And what better way to do a Mount Rushmore than the namesake with Table Setters and setting the table for all things offense. Let's get into the Mount Rushmore segment. All right, Devin, all these months back, you and I were discussing names for this podcast, and I forget what the runner-up of this name was. And so far in the past at this point, there was like 4 or 5 we had listed. And for whatever reason, Table Setters just stuck out to us. And it's so apropos for this show. And the interesting part about researching Table Setters, when you type it in onto Google, we're one of the first things that come up. And we've only been 60 episodes in. And the word table setter truly is synonymous with baseball and such a big deal for literally just that, setting the table offensively for your team. And there's been so many players throughout the history of baseball have done just that in a really good way. And I think for every championship team, I don't think there's an exception to the rule. You have to have a guy getting on base to set the tone for your team and really setting the table.
Yeah, no doubt. And now I'm curious. I'm gonna have to go. I feel like I have it in my notes of like ideas for the podcast name. I wonder if it was terrible. Table Setters is solid. I'm still a fan of it. 60 episodes in. It makes me think of Stone Cold Steve Austin. What was his? Do you remember? There's this famous story about some of the other ideas for his name, and some of them are just insanely bad. Off the top of your head,
I remember the origin of the name, where like I think his wife at the time said, "Drink your tea, it's getting stone cold."
Yeah. But
it was like something. It was something on the nose, like something freeze, or like it was like cold.
We'll find it before the episode's over. The one of the other ideas for his name was just so rough, but thank God he chose the right one.
Devin, do you have any runner-ups for your Mount Rushmore? Obviously, Mount Rushmore is 4 different choices, but I came to the conclusion with 6, but I'm going to give you my top 4, but 5 and 6 I wanted to at least include because I think they deserve to be mentioned.
So yeah, I basically what I did is I started listing guys, and then once I had a list of 10 or so that I felt like deserved consideration, I tried to dig in a little more and come up with my top 4. For me, the first 2 I got were obvious once I looked at some things. And then the second 2 spots, I went back and forth really between 3 people and left one guy off that I still am questioning of whether he should be off. But do you want to say those guys now, or do you want to say our 4 and then give our notable mentions or whatever you want to call them?
I guess let's start with 4 on. It's not in any specific order because I
Right.
think, like, obviously the Mount Rushmore, they don't put them in order. I think you and I had this conversation last time we did the Mount Rushmores, but I guess start with your number 4 and then I'll volley back with mine.
Okay, so first of all, I think this is the second time we've done a Mount Rushmore. The first one was role players. Role players, we had one guy in common out of the 4. This one, I'm guessing, and I could be wrong, but I think we're going to have more crossover. After I did
Mhm.
my research, I'm like, I just think there's some guys that are a little bit undeniable here. All right, so I'll start off with the guy that I think will definitely be crossover, and that's Ricky Henderson. So
Mhm.
Ricky Henderson, I mean, first of all, let me start with this. When I think of table setter, these are the qualifications I'm looking for. Gets on base, hits either 1 or 2 in the lineup. I don't think it's just leadoff hitters. I think some people might think a table setter is just the leadoff hitter. For me, it's 1 and 2. Set it up for the big boys in the 3 and 4 spot. I know the baseball game has changed a little bit. Sometimes, you see a Juan Soto in the 2 spot because he walks so much, and certainly he can be a powerful dude. And not necessarily thought of as a table setter in the traditional way. But for me, considering all baseball history, I think of a table setter, gets on base, hits 1 or 2, scores runs. I feel like you need to be on that runs list somewhere. Walks, speed is kind of an added bonus. I don't necessarily think every table setter needs speed. It helps advance you, but setting the table is just getting on for the most part. Obviously, speed helps you beat some things out, so there is a little bit of consideration there. Maybe sometimes a batting stance that gets you hit by a lot of pitches. I think that helps. So anyway, Ricky Henderson is on mine, all-time stolen base leader, all-time runs leader in the 3,000 hit club, Hall of Famer. To me, an obvious choice.
Yeah, I have Ricky Henderson as well. He was the first guy I listed on here, consistently getting on base, walks and singles, and he was just a nightmare for pitchers and catchers trying to hold him on. And he easily could turn a single into a double. His ability to disrupt the game, to me, that's equivalent to a table setter. He forces opposing pitchers to change their focus. He affects the rhythm of the game, and that's what it's all about. I mean, by definition, as you mentioned, getting on base, creating opportunities for others, that is a table setter. But when you think of Ricky Henderson, he just upsets the apple cart. People can't be comfortable with him on base. And ultimately, he creates havoc on the base paths. And eventually, more times than not, he's going to wind up coming around third and scoring. So to me, he sets the table for either a big inning or at least getting his team on the board. And to me, he's quintessential table setter. Like, I picture table setter as Ricky Henderson. His face just appears in my
Definitely.
head.
Yeah. All right. So you give me the next one since I went first, and I'll rebuttal.
So my number 2 here is Tim Raines, and he was the model of consistency. If you look at his numbers, I mean, he represents table setter just as much as Ricky Henderson. Excellent speed, fantastic on base. That's another thing for me. He often let off games or innings. I mean, he got the walks, he hits for average, he steals for bases. And like Ricky, I think the main objective for him was to get on base and create scoring opportunities, whether it was for him or just making pitchers uncomfortable. And he really was successful at that. I mean, his ability to steal bases at critical times. Similar to Ricky, I mean, he did it in bulk, as you mentioned. The leader all time in stolen bases, 1406 for Ricky. But the thing with Tim Raines, his ability to get on base, like, you can't steal bases unless you get on base. And I think for Tim Raines, he's an essential piece for setting up offense for his team and getting off to a good start. And for Tim Raines, I think for where he played a lot of his career, people forget because he played in markets that maybe didn't get a lot of shine. So I think Tim Raines deserves some of the spotlight for being a table setter.
So he's one of my honorable mentions. I have 3 of them after I give my 4 that I'm putting on the Mount Rushmore. But I mean, not one that I can just argue that he shouldn't be there because he was definitely considered. My next one here is Pete Rose. Again, when you look at the body type and you look at it, you just don't necessarily think of him as like the Ricky Henderson guy. But make no mistake, man, this guy's one of the best table setters of all time. Basically, the table setter for the Big Red Machine. Such a great Cincinnati Reds team. And the all-time hits king. So how can you deny that when you're trying to get on base? 5th all-time in runs. So to me, I don't feel like you got to go that deep to argue that he should be on that Mount Rushmore.
100% one of my runners up as well. I wanted to include Pete Rose, but I was also trying to keep it skewed with a little bit of the present and balance it with the past. And this is a little bit of a homer pick. I'm going with Derek Jeter for my other pick. I mean, everyone remembers him for the clutch postseason moments, but he also had a knack for setting the table. If you think about those big innings during those prime Yankee years, during those dynasty years, he wasn't the fastest player, but his ability to hit in key situations and get on base during crucial times made him a great leadoff hitter in big games. Even when he was batting second, he can turn the inning around. He had the excellent ability to make contact. And I think we were talking about getting on base, but also not hitting into outs, getting on base, advancing runners, and finding a way to be productive. And also the intangibles, the leadership qualities for him, ability to manage pressure. Those things can't be quantified on the field all the time with numbers. I think Derek Jeter was a leader by all dimensions. And his role as a table setter, he was consistent. I mean, I think about, and I know it's going to hurt your heart, but like the Subway Series, the home run he hit, just to set the tone, set the table for the 2000 Subway Series. And to me, Derek Jeter deserves to be on this list.
Yeah, I can see it. He did not quite make my top 4, and he did not quite make the couple of honorable mentions that I had. But I get it, and maybe a little bit of a homer pick, but he definitely a quintessential table setter kind of guy. I just wanted to give you one more thing on Pete Rose. So I found a great article that specifically talks about these guys in the leadoff spot, because a lot of these guys that make this list are considered didn't necessarily spend their entire career in leadoff. So you kind of want to know, well, what were their stats specifically in the leadoff spot? So Pete Rose spent more time in the leadoff spot than any other spot in the order. He had nearly 3,000 of his hits, obviously had way more than 3,000 hits total, but had nearly 3,000 hits from just that spot. Hit 308, 379 on base, 125 stolen bases from that spot as well. So it's crazy numbers just from the leadoff spot alone. My next guy on my list that actually made it here is Rod Carew. A couple stats: 393 career on base percentage, 328 career batting average, 7 batting titles. One of those batting titles is 0 home runs. He's one of 3 guys to ever do that, where he won a batting title and didn't put any over the fence. 3,000 hit club. For the most part, he hit second in lineups. He spent a tiny bit of time leadoff and some time in the 3-hole, but mostly second, which for me is within the definition of a table setter, 1 or 2. 353 stolen bases, 17 times he stole home. So you know what? It was between him and another guy that I went back and forth with, and I'll mention that guy when we get to our honorable mentions. But I ended up going with Rod Carew on the Mount Rushmore.
So again, I have some runners up that I do want to mention before I get to my number 4 guy. My number 5 was Mookie Betts, and number 6 was Kenny Lofton, that I believe that deserves some love here. Kenny Lofton, people don't talk about Kenny, and I saw this thread on Twitter about him the other day, so I guess that's why he was fresh in my brain. One of the more feared leadoff hitters in the 90s, wreaking havoc on the base paths. And I think, by definition, the table setters were thinking about that type of archetype of a player. He didn't make my Mount Rushmore, but I thought he deserved some love because I think about those 90s Cleveland teams, and they were pretty damn good, and Kenny Lofton was a big reason for it.
He was one of my honorable mentions. It was Tim Raines, Kenny Lofton, and I'll tell you the other guy that was my number 1 honorable mention after we finished the actual Rushmore.
So I'll give you my other Mount Rushmore guy, and it's Tony Gwynn, one of the best pure hitters in baseball. Gwynn's ability to make contact and get on base, I mean, not even hyperbolically, it was legendary. He's not a base stealer like Ricky Henderson or Tim Raines, but his ability to hit for average and put the ball in play made him a perfect leadoff hitter. Looking at his numbers, he was only serving as a leadoff hitter in the starting lineup for only 47 games in his career, but he does over his 20-season career, 1982 to 2001. Gwynn led off an inning 24 times, 2,124 times, batting .352 in those situations. So I mean, that itself. And we understand that the lineup does turn over. You have opportunities to lead off innings, so you don't have to start the game at number 1, but you have the ability to set the table for whatever inning you're in. And he did set up his teammates by consistently getting on base and getting into scoring positions, making his high batting average to me. And also the word is discipline. This guy is not swinging at any bad pitches, and he's not striking out, which is crucial in creating offensive opportunities, and also not squandering them as well. So if you strike out, you don't give the defense a chance to make a mistake. And Tony Gwynn gave everybody an opportunity to make a mistake, even if he hit into and out.
See, this is why this segment is so interesting and so fun, because you do have these things where we each get to define this slightly differently. Tony Gwynn was a consideration for me, but I couldn't find, you found a little bit there with many times he led off, which was not a lot. But from what I was finding, I feel like he was more in the 3 hole for the most of his career. I love what
Yeah.
you're saying about him leading off innings, because that's an interesting way to look at it that I did not. Not necessarily at the top of the game. You're right. It doesn't always have to be in that scenario. But I kind of disqualified him because of that. Although if you put him in today's game, the way they make lineups, he's the perfect number 2 hitter. He's like Juan Soto-esque in a way, like the perfect number 2 hitter. But because of where he was most of his career, I kind of took him out. But I buy your argument. I think it's unique and creative for sure. And I guess not as much crossover in our 4 as we thought, which is, again, interesting and why this is a cool segment. My number 4 is Ichiro. I wanted to get a more modern player because, again, went Ricky Henderson, Pete Rose, Rod Carew, so most from the prior kind of generation or two. Ichiro, 311 career hitter, 3,089 hits just in MLB. Think about if he was here for the beginning of his career, what those numbers would be. They'd be insane. 18 seasons in Major League Baseball, 509 stolen bases, 355 OBP, 1,420 runs. Most hits in a season, right? He has that record, 262. In the leadoff spot specifically, he hit 324, 367 OBP in that spot. 436 of his stolen bases came from the leadoff spot. I mean, that guy, I feel like, especially in the peak of his career, you just felt like, all right, just put him on base. You might as well just let him go because he's getting on base. He can kind of do whatever he wants. So he was my 4. And then I'll give you, so Ricky Henderson, Pete Rose, Rod Carew, Ichiro make up my Mount Rushmore of table setters. My honorable mentions, I mentioned Tim Raines, Kenny Lofton. Lou Brock was the one that kind of hurt me to leave off. Second in career stolen bases. Henderson is the only one who passed him. 3,000 hits club, 47th in runs scored at 1610. So he had all the numbers, everything you need to be an all-time table setter. There's only 4 spots. I already had my 4 spots given, but if there was a 5th, I think it would go to Lou Brock.
Yeah, I do love the Lou Brock pick. He does pop on a lot of those lists for leading off innings and getting on base. We didn't really elaborate on, but what are your thoughts on the Mookie Betts pick as far as a runner-up for a table setter? Because I think he represents the modern game as far as what became this type of player, perfect mix of traditional leadoff qualities like speed and on base with the added ability to change the game with the power that a lot of these players are lacking. I mean, any of these guys can kind of take it deep at any moment, but Mookie really developed that power swing into something decent where he hits for both average and power, and he also gets on base through walks and hits. He's kind of like the perfect player here that you can put any spot in the lineup. And if you want to combine him on in a leadoff spot, he does really well there as well. I think he can kind of alter his game to make himself fit to wherever he is in the lineup.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at it now, just try to pull it up quickly. So I just said Ichiro 355 career OBP. So that was my first thought. Like, all right, well, how often is Mookie on base? Because you got to be on base to be a table setter. If I'm looking at this right, the career OBP is 373. So, like, to me, yeah, that absolutely qualifies. He's, at the top of the lineup. So it does make sense. He's not one guy I thought of. And it's almost like you're kind of unfairly penalizing him for maybe having more pop than most of the table setters you're thinking of. But when you see that on base percentage for his career, it's pretty hard to argue.
So this stats about Mookie and being a prominent leadoff hitter throughout his career. On May 13th, 2024, he hit his 50th career leadoff home run. He has his 51st leadoff home run at this point. And by the end of the 2024 season, he has 52 leadoff home runs at this point. And you go watch the highlights of it. He's tied the MLB record for most RBIs from the leadoff spot in a single season, 103 RBIs back in 2022. It's just he hasn't been in the leadoff spot since that point. So I think if he was there all the time, he's putting up crazy numbers. And we think of setting the table is getting on base, but what's better than setting the table of just setting the tone with a home run to lead off the game? And it seems like nobody's better than Mookie of doing that. So the more we look at Mookie's career, I look at Mookie as, first of all, you have the conversation, how did Boston ever move on from this dude? It's crazy. But Mookie, as far as like, I think he's one of those players that as time goes on, you're going to really appreciate him in the rearview mirror. He's so dynamic that it's hard to just even quantify it until it's long gone. Because again, he's lost in the shuffle of this Dodgers huge conglomerate of stars at this point. But Mookie is so special.
Oh, no doubt about it. And I'm looking very interesting here. So he's played for 11 seasons, Mookie. 1,071 runs scored, which again is what you want your table setter to end up doing. And now part of that depends on the team you're on. But when you think of the powerhouse he's on, he's 11 years into his career, 1,071 runs scored. Ricky Henderson, all-time leader in runs scored, played 25 seasons, so more than double what Mookie's played. Ended up with 2,295. So Mookie, a little less than halfway to that point, hasn't played half the years yet, and is on this powerhouse Dodgers team as of now that can certainly drive him in seemingly willingly. It's an interesting discussion. Obviously, not everyone ages as gracefully as a Ricky Henderson, who at times, during his career played until he was 44, 45. Seemed like he
Yeah.
wasn't human, he seemed like a robot. But if Mookie can age gracefully and play for a lot longer, you never know where he gets on that all-time runs list. Like, it'll be interesting to see where he ends up for sure.
So again, that's our Mount Rushmore. Devin's going to post inevitably a graphic up there so you guys can check it out like he did with our role players. And I think, like you mentioned before, the interesting part about this is how we define what it was. I think you and I were in the scope of what a table setters was at some point, but we defined it a little differently about what these players fit the mold. And I think ultimately we have the same goal. It's setting the tone for the game and getting your team off to a good start. And I think there's a lot of leeway into figuring out where to go with it. But all of these players here, you couldn't go wrong with any of the names we mentioned.
Yeah, no, there was no point, I think, in either list or honorable mention where it was like, oh, come on, you got to get that guy off the list. And I'm sure there's some people listening and thinking of a guy we didn't say where they're like, how can you not say? And that's what X is for. So give us your thoughts.
Yeah. I love the Ichiro pick too. And he was definitely listed as one of my guys that I'm like, oh, I got to get him in there. But when I do these Mount Rushmores, and I don't know if it's like something that's just specific to me, I want to try to have a blend of modern players plus the
Yeah,
older players, because you could sit in any generation of players and just say, let's just do leadoff hitters from the 80s, from the 90s, from the 2000s, and you get kind of lost. And the only pick four feels like the hardest task of all because we could have picked 25 of them at this point.
absolutely, man. Like I gave hard thought to other guys, Paul Molitor, Wade Boggs, like was one who almost
Yeah.
slipped by, and then I looked at some of the numbers. I'm like, oh wow, you have to give this guy some conversation. The Mets fan in me, like one of the best table setters I ever watched day in and day out was Jose Reyes. Like, guy was electric in the prime of his career. But so yeah, you can make your Mount Rushmore however you see fit. And I think that's the fun part about it. I'm like you. I try to get at least a little bit of modern era, which is why I put Ichiro in there, because I already had three guys from a different era. So I think it's a fair way to do it.
So if you guys want to engage with this, do your own Mount Rushmore of table setters, let us know. Engage with us on the tweet here at Table Setters Pod. Send us a message. You can also send us an email at tablesettersbaseball@gmail.com. Let us know. Engage with us. Have a conversation. This is what it's all about. We're in the off season here. We have a lot of time to have conversations about hypotheticals and how these fun things, but eventually we'll be in the nuts and bolts of the season. We'll still do fun things like this, but this is the leeway we get for the off season. And really, I mean, we had some news to break down and we did discuss it at length, but one of the slower news weeks in baseball this week, I would say, Devin. And we were able to have a little bit of fun with it with our Q&A. I mean, this is one of our more jam-packed episodes we've done thus far.
Yeah, and not necessarily all news driven, like you said, like a little bit of the Q&A with Dave Sims, a little bit of college commitment, which is kind of a cool one out of nowhere, and the Mount Rushmore, which we said we're trying to, not something we're going to do every single episode, but if you do it once a month, I think it is a good way of not letting it get watered down.
So let's come around third here as we are setting the table here for the end of the episode, and let's give our wrap up and preview next week. All right, as we approach the elusive number 61, like Roger Maris, we're sitting here and looking forward to all the things spring training has ahead, all the storylines that inevitably people will overreact to, getting ready for all the games that are going to be happening during the day in Florida and being able to enjoy those things for the minimal amount of time until we get sick of it and we say, we want baseball to start here. And we have an early start, man. Like, we have those games internationally starting at the end of March. It's going to be here before we know it.
Yeah, I can taste it a little bit, but I try not to let myself get too excited, especially for the beginning of spring training, because then it makes it feel like it takes longer to get to. But for now, Mets fans, we're enjoying some of the New Jersey stuff that's coming out with the racing, the pipeline down the pants or around the sleeves, and Brandon Sprout has a nice new mustache that he showed off. Looks a little bit like a Timothy Chalamet or something like that. So these are the things you grasp onto when pitchers and catchers report, and that's kind of all you got.
Absolutely. And as we look forward to the season that is, we'll start to define the teams that will be the haves and haves nots. And we're going to come up with maybe a little bit more of the, I don't know, streamlined of what the weeks for the season that will look like as we approach it. Maybe we'll do some division previews. Let us know
Yeah,
what you want us to do. I think when we initially started this podcast, when Devin and I, if you guys know the history of this show, Devin and I were doing this podcast as a kind of supplemental thing for our fantasy baseball league. And we were doing previews and conversations. We did an episode that was dedicated to when Trevor Bauer signed. We did an episode in defense of Juan Soto back in the day when our league was kind of down on Juan Soto as a legendary player. And damn, was I right about that, by the way. And
yeah,
all the conversations that continue to have division previews. We had my brother on that time to preview the NL West, if you remember. So that was pretty damn cool. So yeah, I think for the preview of the season, I think we definitely want to put our flag in the ground of saying what we believe is going to happen. I think there need to be time for that, for predictions and win totals and all that good stuff. Maybe pick up the props of over-unders of wins and get what Vegas thinks of some of these teams. Should be a good conversation. But we'll do it in a fun way. You know, we're not going to do a dry episode where we're just going to be like, this is what we think is going to happen, but try to put our spin on things because we appreciate you giving us the time of listening to what we're putting out there and having conversations about baseball because we know there's a lot of content out there. You can engage with a lot of different content. The fact that you're choosing to listen to us and more week after week, we're getting more people on board listening to us and having conversations. We appreciate that. So we want to continue to have an energetic approach to the things that we love. And it's baseball, dude. Baseball all the time, which I love that you said that.
Oh, yeah. All baseball all the time. That's what we're going for from now until the wheels fall off.
So we're going to get ready for next week. Like I said, episode 61. We're going to have more guests on as the path goes on. So stay tuned to social media at Tablesetters Pod, both on Twitter and on Instagram to know the upcoming guests. And go back in the archives and check out these other episodes. Like we mentioned, we had a lot of guests on, like Devin mentioned, a significant amount of focus on your favorite teams. If maybe you were sleeping on baseball during the offseason, you were just focusing on football and you woke up post the Eagles victory after the Eagles fans destroyed Philadelphia and set it on fire in their celebratory moments. And New Orleans is now wiping off all the grease off all of their telephone poles because they didn't want people climbing them. And you're like, hey, baseball's starting. Go back in the archives. Maybe you're a Cincinnati Reds fan. Go check out our coverage of them. Maybe you're a Boston Red Sox fan. Check out what we did with Joey Capone. If you're a Guardians fan, go back and check out what we said about their team as well. There's a lot of great evergreen content in the Tablesetters archive that I'm looking forward to you guys checking out. And if, like you said, if there is a team, like Devin put the poll up there for the Texas Rangers, if there's a team specific or maybe a podcast team centrically that you listen to that you'd like us to collaborate with, let us know. I'm happy to do that. I love the like-minded minds here in the baseball community, a lot of nice people, and we've made a lot of good connections here. Like we said, the Rolodex continues to thicken, and we were looking forward to collaborating again and having some repeat guests because that's going to happen soon.
Yeah, and speaking of that roundtable, if you're a listener who's been with us for a while and barely misses any episodes, and hopefully there are some of those kind of people out there, and you have a few favorites that you would suggest for the roundtable, whether it's DM us or put it in the comment, let us know. Like we have a lot of people to choose from. I definitely have some in my mind that come up quicker than others, but I'm interested to see if there's any favorites out there of people actually listening. That's kind of the more important thing.
So we will be back next week talking all things Major League Baseball. And I said last week, maybe Pete Alonso will sign. He wound up signing. Well, I'm going to say it here. Maybe Alex Bregman will sign. Maybe we'll get that news dropping and we'll talk about it next week. But we'll return next week for episode 61, and we will talk to you after a while.
High fly ball into right field. She is gone in a year that has been so improbable.